Let me tell you about the night Mary Adeyemi learned that danger and safety don't always look the way you expect. She was late, broke, and backed against a pole by three men who thought a crowded platform and broken cameras meant they could do whatever they wanted. They were wrong. Not because anyone threw a punch, but because a group of bikers showed up and reminded everyone that power doesn't need to shout. If that sounds like a story you want to hear, subscribe now, because this one's about the kind of help that doesn't ask for credit. Mary Adeyemi was running on fumes. Another double shift at the clinic, another missed child support payment, another apologetic conversation with the daycare lady who was running out of patience and grace. Her tote bag cut into her shoulder, work shoes rattling against a plastic lunchbox that had seen better years. The 5:42 train from Platform C was her lifeline home to her 7-year-old son, and she was already late. Rent was due in 3 days. The lights had a red notice, and the math in her head never added up, no matter how many times she recalculated it. She pushed through the turnstile and felt the platform's familiar meanness settle over her like fog. That's when she saw them. 3 men claiming the bench like it was territory, not seating. One wore tattoos like armor. Another sported a red and black flannel that had seen too many bar fights. And the third, older and bald, had the watchful eyes of someone who knew exactly where the cameras didn't point. They were laughing at nothing, just to own the sound. Mary counted the yellow safety chevrons like prayer beads, trying to reach the far pole. 11 steps. 10. But predators have instincts. "Hey, sweetheart." Tattoo slid off the bench, falling into step beside her like he'd been invited. "You look stressed. We can help with that." "I'm late," Mary said, not slowing, not stopping. Flannel moved in front, smile going sour. "Then let's make it worth your time." The bald one didn't speak. He just flanked. And suddenly, Mary's back was against the metal pole, 3 men forming a loose triangle that tightened with every heartbeat. She lifted her chin, that home-taught blend of defiance and dignity that said, you can still be human while saying no. "I said I'm late." Tattoo reached for her forearm. She twisted free, shock flashing in his eyes for one small, victorious second before Flannel's palm slammed the pole behind her head. A few teenagers' laughter faded. Commuters shifted their gazes in that slippery way people do when danger is close enough to smell, but still deniable. Security was everywhere and nowhere, moving just slow enough to be too late. Then it happened. Not the squeal of incoming brakes. Not the bark of a guard's radio. A sound like weather that wasn't on any forecast, engines. It started at the edge of the parking lot, a distant rolling growl that swelled into a brazen, synchronized rumble so steady the pigeons lifted as one. Heads turned toward the access road as a procession of motorcycles, black and low and heavy, curled off the asphalt in a disciplined arc. They didn't race. They took the space. A river finding its old channel. The lead rider cut his engine first. One by one, the rest followed. And for a breath, the station held a silence more threatening than any shout. They dismounted. Leather vests, club patches, boots built for gravel. The man in front had the kind of silver beard that made you reconsider what age and wisdom really meant. Aviators caught the last slice of daylight. A cross flashed at his chest. His forearms carried stories no one had time to hear, but everyone felt. The thugs froze. Tattoo muttered something that must have sounded brave in his head. Flannel scanned for exits. The bald one's survival instincts blinked first. The bikers didn't crowd. They arranged. 5 of them spaced themselves along the yellow line, equidistant, as if they'd measured the platform with their boots. 2 leaned against a pillar like it was a neighborhood stoop. 1 rested a gloved hand on his throttle, but didn't rev it. The shape they made wasn't a wall. It was a choice. The silver-bearded leader, Dave, though Mary didn't know his name yet, removed his aviators with 1 unhurried hand and hooked them into his vest. His eyes were clear, older than the beard suggested, and very, very awake. "Evening," he said, and the word carried more gravity than the platform was built to hold. Tattoo tried for swagger. "You got business here?" Dave's gaze flicked to Mary, taking in the 2 thin tote straps, the keys looped through a hair tie, the tear in the corner of her shoe that spoke of buses and rain, then back to the men. He said, like a man tasting soup that needed salt, "Not yours." A stockier biker drifted behind the thugs and set his boots like a bookend. A younger one rested a hand on the bench, not touching, just claiming. The bald thug's quiet, "Eight." He stepped back because his instincts were older than his pride, and then everyone else's feet told the truth. The triangle loosened. Flannel tried to save face with a scoff. "We were just talking." Dave's mouth didn't smile, but something kind touched his eyes. "Talk somewhere else." For a suspended second, the platform became a scale, everything on it turning into weight. Mary's fear, the men's bravado, the biker's stillness. Then reality tipped the only way it could. Tattoo muttered. Flannel shrugged. The bald one led the retreat like he'd had sense planted in him by someone who loved him once. They left. Not running, that would admit too much, but quick enough to look like men with places to be. A breath Mary hadn't realized she was holding left her body like a confession. Dave broke eye contact first, and that somehow felt like a gift. He turned to his crew, and in the same unhurried manner that had dismantled the danger, they turned to unseen, ordinary labors. 1 inspected a wobbly service door hinge. Another used a screwdriver to rescue a bent stroller wheel for a woman frozen at the scene's edge. Someone exchanged quick words with the station guard who'd suddenly materialized, promising donations to the Broken Cameras Fund, with a tone that made everyone believe the cameras would work by tomorrow. Dave stepped closer to Mary, but not close enough to crowd. "You all right?" Her mouth said yes before her spine finished trembling. "I'm fine, thank you." He nodded, as if confirming a report he'd already verified. "You got someone waiting?" "My son," she said, and the words softened every edge inside her. 7. He's with Mrs. Ajayi till I get back. Dave tilted his head. "Good woman," he said, like he knew her, which, as it turned out, he did, though Mary wouldn't connect the dots tonight. He reached into his vest, not slow enough to be theatrical, not fast enough to spook, and pulled out a plain cream envelope. No logo, no return address. He studied her face for half a second, then offered it. "I can't," Mary started, reflex colliding with need. "This isn't charity," Dave said, tone level. "It's change for a world that takes too much." Her fingers touched the paper. It felt heavier than envelopes usually do. She didn't look inside. She looked at him. "Which?" she asked, because the question stretched far beyond the envelope. Dave's gaze tracked the horizon where the tracks split, like choices do. He slid his aviators back on, and the silver beard caught the dim light like a lighthouse lantern. "Because somebody did it for someone I love," he said simply. "And because your boy's waiting." The 542 announced itself with a whistle, and the platform remembered its purpose. One of Dave's crew fell into step beside Mary for the 20 paces to the train door, a quiet escort that looked like nothing and felt like everything. As she stepped aboard, a biker repaired the service door latch with a self-satisfied click. Another left a business card with the station manager and a folded receipt for a new camera system that would somehow be delivered and installed within 48 hours. Only when the doors slid shut did Mary open the envelope. Cash, not a fortune, but enough to stop the power company's red notice from turning into darkness, and a single index card with tidy handwriting, "Keep going. You're stronger than you know." No signature, no patch, just the truth. Mary pressed the card between her palms and held it there, a prayer that didn't need words. If this story moved something in you, hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to be reminded that help can arrive in unexpected forms, and subscribe because stories of quiet courage deserve to be heard. Tell me in the comments, do you believe moments like this, when strangers become guardians without asking for applause, still happen today? Your voice matters, and your story might just remind someone else that they're not as alone as they think. The motorcycle settled into silence like punctuation at the end of a sentence nobody had been brave enough to speak. Chrome caught the last slice of dying light. Leather creaked as riders dismounted with the kind of synchronized efficiency that suggested this wasn't performance. It was protocol. 5 of them moved to the yellow safety line first. Not rushing, not crowding. They simply placed themselves at intervals so precise it looked like someone had measured the platform with surveyor's tools. Equidistant. Deliberate. A human fence that didn't need to touch to be felt. Mary's breath caught somewhere between her ribs and her throat. The 3 men who'd boxed her in hadn't moved yet, but their posture had changed. Tattoo's swagger leaked out through his shoulders. Flannel's smirk thinned to a line that tried too hard. The bald one's eyes did that quick, practiced sweep. Exits, cameras, angles. The way a man does when he's calculating odds he suddenly doesn't like. Dave stood at the center of the tableau, unhurried as Sunday morning. He reached up with one weathered hand and removed his aviators, hooking them carefully into the pocket of his vest. When his eyes met the platform's dim fluorescent glare, they were clear, sharp. The kind of awake that comes from seeing too much and deciding to stay decent anyway. "Evening," he said. The word landed soft, almost conversational, but it carried the weight of a gavel striking wood. The air itself seemed to lean in and listen. Tattoo swallowed, then forced a laugh that cracked at the edges. "We got a problem here?" Dave tilted his head, considering the question the way you'd consider a wine that had turned. His gaze slid past the 3 men and landed on Mary. Not invasive, not lingering, just noticing. The tote straps cutting into her shoulder. The keys threaded through a fraying hair tie because she'd lost the ring weeks ago and couldn't afford to replace it. The split seam at the toe of her left sneaker that told a story of bus stops and rain and miles walked when the fare ran out. He took all of that in within a single breath, then returned his attention to the men. Dave said, as if tasting something that needed salt. "Not yours." Flannel tried to salvage momentum. "Look, man, we were just talking. She's cool, right?" He glanced at Mary like she owed him confirmation. Mary said nothing. Her silence was its own answer. Behind the 3 men, almost as an afterthought, a stockier biker with soft eyes and knuckles that told different stories drifted into position. He didn't announce himself, didn't make a show. He just was, suddenly occupying the space behind Flannel like he'd always been there, boots settling into the concrete with the finality of a period. To the left, A younger crew member, beard still more optimism than achievement, rested a gloved hand on the bench the thugs had claimed minutes earlier. Not touching them, not threatening, just reclaiming territory the way water reclaims a shoreline. The bald thug's instincts fired first. Mary saw it in his eyes, that flicker of recognition that comes when a predator realizes it's been outmaneuvered by something further up the food chain. He shifted his weight backward, just an inch. But in a moment like this, an inch might as well be a mile. The platform had become a scale. On one side, fear dressed up as bravado. 3 men whose courage depended on the absence of consequences. On the other, stillness that didn't need to shout. A discipline that made violence look like the wasteful option it usually was. Tattoo tried one more time. We weren't doing nothing. Dave's mouth didn't smile, but something almost kind touched the corners of his eyes. Then do it somewhere else. The younger biker behind them didn't move. Didn't have to. His presence was enough, a parenthesis closing around a sentence that had gone on too long. Flannel scoffed, but it sounded like air leaking from a tire. Whatever, man. We got places to be anyway. Good, Dave said, and the word was a door closing softly. The bald one moved first because his survival instincts were older and wiser than his pride. He turned, not fleeing but departing, the distinction thin but real. Flannel followed, throwing a look over his shoulder that tried to sell defiance, but only advertised relief. Tattoo lingered half a second longer, ego wrestling with self-preservation, then followed, muttering something that nobody bothered to decode. They didn't run. Running would admit too much, but they walked with the brisk, purposeful stride of men who'd just remembered urgent appointments they absolutely could not miss. Mary's knees threatened to give out. The adrenaline that had kept her spine straight drained away like water through a sieve, leaving her hollow and trembling. Dave didn't watch the thugs leave. He watched the space they'd occupied, making sure it stayed empty. Then he nodded once, not to them, but to the vacuum they'd left behind, as if acknowledging that the platform had returned to its rightful owners. The tired, the late, the people just trying to get home. Only then did he turn his full attention to Mary, and his voice, when it came, was quieter than before, almost gentle. "You all right?" Mary's mouth answered before her spine finished trembling. "I'm fine. Thank you." Dave nodded, the gesture small but weighted, as if he were verifying a report he'd already read. He didn't press, didn't hover. He simply turned to his crew with the kind of unspoken signal that came from years of riding in formation. And the bikers scattered like they'd been given coordinates. What happened next wasn't what Mary expected. One of them, a wiry man with graying temples and hands that moved with the precision of someone who'd built things for a living, produced a small toolkit from his saddlebag and knelt beside the platform's service door. The hinge had been wobbling for months. Mary had noticed it every evening, the way it scraped and caught when station workers tried to prop it open. Within 30 seconds, he had the pin reset and the door swinging smooth and silent. He tested it twice, nodded to himself, and moved on without fanfare. Near the benches, a younger biker with kind eyes and forearms covered in ink stopped beside a woman who'd frozen during the confrontation. Her toddler's stroller tilted at an angle that suggested a broken wheel. He crouched down, didn't ask permission, just produced a multi-tool and went to work. The mother watched, suspicious at first, then grateful as the wheel clicked back into alignment. He stood, tipped his chin, and walked away before she could fumble for words. Dave himself approached the station manager, A tired-looking man in a wrinkled uniform who'd appeared from the office with the timing of someone who'd waited for the danger to pass. They spoke quietly, Dave's tone respectful but firm. Mary caught fragments. Cameras, and 48 hours, and we'll cover it. The manager's shoulders straightened as Dave pulled a folded receipt from his vest and pressed it into the man's hand. A promise, not a threat. Funding for equipment that should have been replaced years ago, but kept getting bumped down the budget. It was choreography of a different kind. Not the geometry of power, but the architecture of care. Small fixes that wouldn't make headlines, but would change someone's night, maybe someone's week. Dave returned to Mary, stopping at a conversational distance that respected her space. "You got someone waiting?" The question was gentle, an invitation rather than an interrogation. "My son," Mary said, and saying it out loud softened something sharp inside her chest. 7. He's with Mrs. Ajayi till I get back. Something shifted in Dave's expression. Recognition, maybe, or confirmation. "Good woman," he said, and the words carried the weight of familiarity. Mary's brow furrowed slightly. "You know her?" Dave's mouth hinted at a smile but didn't commit. "I know a lot of good people." He let the statement hang there, neither confirming nor denying, then reached into his vest with the same unhurried motion he'd used for the aviators. What he withdrew was a plain cream envelope. No logo, no return address. Just paper that somehow felt heavier than it should. He held it out. Mary stared at it, then at him. Every instinct she'd spent years honing. The pride that kept her upright. The independence she'd fought to maintain. Collided with the arithmetic that ruled her life. 3 days to rent. Red notice on the power bill. Daycare debt stacking like bricks. "I can't," she started, the reflex automatic. "This isn't charity," Dave said, his tone level, neither pitying nor patronizing. "It's change for a world that takes too much." His eyes held hers, steady and clear, and Mary understood in that moment that this wasn't about debt or gratitude. It was something else. Something that allowed her to remain whole. Her fingers touched the envelope. It felt warm, though that might have been her imagination. "Wait, why?" she asked, because the question stretched far beyond the paper in her hand. Dave's gaze drifted toward the horizon where the tracks split and diverged, choices made visible in iron and distance. He slid his aviators back on, and the silver threading his beard caught the platform's dim light like a lighthouse beam cutting through fog. "Because somebody did it for someone I love," he said simply. "And because your boy's waiting." The 542 announced itself with a whistle that cut through the platform's recovered murmur. Commuters stirred, remembering their destinations. Mary clutched the envelope, her tote, her keys threaded through the hair tie, all the small burdens that suddenly felt lighter. One of Dave's crew, the stocky one with the soft eyes, fell into step beside her without a word. Not crowding, not rushing, just present for the 20 paces it took to reach the train doors. A quiet escort that looked like nothing and meant everything. As Mary stepped aboard, she heard the satisfying click of the service door's latch being tested one final time. Saw another biker shake hands with the station manager and walk away. Witnessed the mother with the stroller push it smoothly toward the exit, her child babbling something about "nice man." The train doors slid shut, sealing Mary into the fluorescent-lit car. Her hands shook as she opened the envelope. Cash. Not a fortune. She counted it twice, to be sure, but enough. Enough to silence the power company's threat. Enough to buy groceries that weren't just rice and hope. enough to stop the spiral for another week, maybe two. And beneath the bills, a single index card. The handwriting was tidy, almost careful. Keep going. You're stronger than you know. No signature, no patch, no claim to gratitude. Mary pressed the card between her palms like a prayer that didn't need words. Through the window, she caught a glimpse of Dave standing on the platform, watching the train pull away. Then he turned, walked back to his bike, and swung a leg over with the ease of long practice. His phone came out. His thumb moved across the screen with the same precision he'd used for everything else. The message was brief, sent to a contact labeled simply Ajayi. Same arrangement, anonymous. He pocketed the device, kick-started the engine, and the low rumble returned. Not as threat this time, but as benediction. The crew fell into formation, and together they rolled out of the lot. Thunder fading into the distance like a storm that had done its work and moved on. Mary's apartment was the kind of small that forced you to be efficient with hope. 2 rooms that did the work of 4, windows that faced a brick wall, and a kitchen where the refrigerator hummed a lonesome tune most nights. She set her tote on the counter beside the red power company notice that had been staring at her for 3 days. Final warning, disconnection imminent. Call this number. She spread the bills from the envelope across the formica, counting them a 3rd time as if the number might change. It didn't, but it was enough. More than enough for the lights. Enough for groceries that included vegetables and maybe, a small cake mix for her son's upcoming birthday. Shame wrestled with relief in her chest. She'd survived 7 years on her own backbone and her mother's prayers, taking nothing she couldn't repay. But this felt different. Not like charity that came with conditions and judgment. More like someone had seen her struggling and decided the world could afford to be a little less cruel. The memories came unbidden, sliding into her mind like photographs from a deck she'd tried to shuffle away. 3 months ago, the child support payment that never arrived, the ex's number disconnected, the caseworker's apologetic voice explaining delays in the system. 2 months ago, Mrs. Ajayi pulling her aside after pickup, voice gentle as rain. "Mama, I can't keep fronting you much longer. I got my own bills." And the week in between when the fridge sang its empty song and her son asked why they were having breakfast for dinner again, his 7-year-old logic not yet cruel enough to connect the dots. Mary folded the bills carefully and tucked them into the sugar canister, her grandmother's hiding place, passed down like wisdom. The index card she kept separate, reading it again in the yellow kitchen light. "Keep going. You're stronger than you know." The knock at her door was soft. Mrs. Ajayi stood in the hallway, her son drowsy against her shoulder in Spider-Man pajamas. "He fought sleep like it owed him money," Mrs. Ajayi said with a smile, transferring the warm weight of him into Mary's arms. But her eyes lingered, reading Mary's face the way a woman who'd raised 5 children learns to read weather. "You look lighter," she observed. Mary hesitated, then pulled the card from her pocket. "Someone helped at the station. I don't even know who. Well, I know a name, but not why." Mrs. Ajayi's expression shifted, something settling behind her eyes like pieces clicking into place. She stepped inside, closing the door with the care of someone about to share a secret. "This isn't the first time," she said quietly. Mary blinked. "What?" 2 months back, when you were short on daycare. An envelope came. Cash. Exact amount. No name. Mrs. Ajayi's voice was steady, matter of fact. And before that, When your car battery died and you needed the tow, someone covered it. Anonymous. Always anonymous. The condition was simple. No debt, no praise, just help. Mary's breath caught. You knew? I suspected, Mrs. Ajayi corrected, but I was told not to tell you. Not unless you asked directly. She touched Mary's arm. Someone's been watching out for you, Mama. Not in a creepy way, in the way we're supposed to watch out for each other, but forget to. Across the city, Dave guided his bike into a modest garage, attached to a low-slung building that had once been a warehouse. The crew followed, engines cutting one by one until the space filled with the companionable silence of work completed. Inside, the clubhouse was more workshop than headquarters. Tools hung on pegboards. A workbench bore the scars of 1,000 repairs. And along one wall, a sprawling collage of Polaroids captured moments that would never make the evening news. A wheelchair ramp built for Ms. Chen's duplex. New locks installed at the women's shelter on 5th. Bags of groceries delivered to the food bank. A playground's broken swing set restored. Not trophies. Records. Proof that the world could be bent toward mercy if you had the right tools and the will to use them. Joel, the youngest, pulled off his gloves and nodded toward the photos. You think she'll figure it out? Dave shrugged out of his vest, hanging it carefully on a hook worn smooth by years of use. Doesn't matter if she does. That's not why we do it. But why her? Joel pressed, the question curious rather than challenging. Dave was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of old debts and older promises. Somebody once stood between my sister and a bad night. A stranger who didn't ask her name, didn't want thanks, just made sure she got home safe when 3 men thought she wouldn't. He paused, jaw working. I wasn't there. Couldn't be. But someone was. So now I am, for whoever needs it. Joel nodded slowly, understanding settling over him like a cloak. The thing is, Dave continued, the second you ask for gratitude, it stops being about them. It becomes about you, and that's when help turns into leverage. He turned, meeting Joel's eyes. We don't do leverage. We do repair. Mary stood at her kitchen window, her son asleep in the next room, the index card still warm between her fingers. Mrs. Ajayi's revelation had shifted something fundamental. This wasn't random kindness. This was pattern. Design. Someone had been holding a safety net beneath her for months, invisible and steady. Why her? The question burned, but beneath it, another truth. She was still standing, still moving, still strong enough to carry her boy toward something better. Tomorrow, she decided, she'd find a way to say thank you. Not to repay, that would miss the point, but to close the loop with dignity intact. To let whoever was watching know that the help had landed, had mattered, had been enough. Near Platform C, beneath a flickering streetlight, Flannel and Tattoo leaned against a graffitied wall. Between them stood a wiry man in a stained jacket, the kind of fixer who made problems for the right price. So these bikers, the fixer said, voice like gravel in a blender. They embarrassed you, yeah? Flannel's jaw tightened. They got lucky, caught us off guard. The fixer smiled, and it wasn't pleasant. Luck runs out. Question is, you want to be there when it does? Tattoo glanced at Flannel, something dark and wounded passing between them. Yeah, Flannel said finally. We do. The fixer's smile widened. Then let's talk about making things even. Mary returned to Platform C 3 days later, in the broad, honest light of midday, when shadows had nowhere to hide. She carried her tote, lighter now, holding only essentials, and a small envelope tucked into her pocket. Inside was a handwritten note on lined paper torn carefully from her son's school notebook. She'd rewritten it 4 times before the words felt right. The station looked different in daylight, less menacing. The service door swung smooth on its hinge. The benches had been cleaned, and mounted in the corners, new and obvious, security cameras blinked their steady red eyes, recording everything. The bikers were there, but scattered, diffuse presences rather than a wall. One worked on a rusted bike rack near the entrance, reinforcing the welds. Another talked with an elderly woman about the best route to the medical center, his tone patient and clear. A third distributed flyers for a weekend food drive, speaking Spanish with a younger couple who looked relieved to be understood. Community, Mary realized, not performance, just presence. She scanned the platform and found Dave near the far pillar, examining something on his phone. He looked up as if he'd felt her gaze, and their eyes met across the distance. He nodded once, acknowledgement, not obligation, and returned to his screen. Mary exhaled and moved toward the station manager's office. That's when she heard the voices. Well, look who's back. Her spine went rigid before she turned. Flannel and Tattoo stood near the turnstiles, flanked by a third man she didn't recognize. Wiry, feral, with the twitchy energy of someone who'd made poor choices into a lifestyle. The bald one was notably absent, his survival instincts apparently sharper than his companions. Flannel's grin was all performance, wounded pride dressed up as confidence. Thought you'd have your bodyguards today. Mary's heart kicked against her ribs. But something had changed since that first night. The cash in the sugar canister had bought her more than groceries and electricity. It had bought her a moment to breathe, to remember that she'd survived worse than 3 men with fragile egos. She didn't look for Dave, didn't scan for the crew. She simply stopped walking, squared her shoulders, and met Flannel's eyes with the kind of steady calm her grandmother had taught her. You can't control what they do, baby girl. Only what you do. I don't need bodyguards, Mary said, her voice clear and carrying. Loud enough for the cameras, loud enough for the commuters pausing to watch, loud enough for the station guard who'd started moving their direction with actual purpose this time. I said no the first time, she continued, each word deliberate. I'm saying it again. No. Now move! The platform went quiet in that particular way that happens when people sense they're witnessing something important. Phones came out, not to help, but to record. And sometimes that was enough. The new cameras tracked and swiveled. The guard's hand rested on his radio. Flannel's grin faltered. Tattoo glanced at the cameras, then at the guard, then at the wiry fixer who suddenly looked less interested in escalation. The geometry had shifted. No dark corners, no broken equipment, no crowd willing to look away. Whatever, Flannel muttered, the word thin and defeated. Not worth it. They retreated, not scattered like before, but deflated. 3 men realizing the platform had changed, and they hadn't. The cameras followed them all the way to the street. Mary's hands trembled, but she didn't let them see. She simply turned and walked to the station manager's office, her stride steady. The manager looked up from his paperwork, recognition lighting his face. Miss, you're the one from the other night. I am. Mary pulled the envelope from her pocket and set it on the desk. Could you make sure this gets to whoever arranged for the cameras? No name needed. Just make sure they know. The manager picked it up carefully as if it weighed more than paper should. "I'll see to that it's delivered." "Thank you," Mary said, and meant it in ways that stretched beyond the moment. Outside, she found Dave leaning against the pillar, aviators on, arms crossed in a posture that suggested he'd watched the entire exchange. She approached slowly, stopping at a conversational distance that respected both their spaces. "New cameras work well," she said. "They do," Dave agreed. A pause stretched between them, comfortable and weighted. Mary reached into her tote and pulled out a small paper bag. "I bought groceries for another mom at the daycare yesterday. Single parent, behind on payments. Mrs. Ajayi helped me find her." Dave's mouth hinted at a smile. "Good. Someone told me once that it's change for a world that takes too much," Mary continued, echoing his words back to him. "Figured I'd add to the change." Dave was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried the warmth of recognition. "The world needs more of that." Mary held his gaze. "I don't need to know names or reasons. I just needed you to know." She paused, searching for words that wouldn't diminish either of them. "It landed. It mattered. And I'm still standing." "I can see that," Dave said softly. The 2:15 train announced itself with a whistle. Mary adjusted her tote strap. "Keep going," Dave said, and the words were both benediction and release. Mary's smile was small but real. "I will." She turned and walked toward the platform, her step lighter than it had been in months. Behind her, she heard the low rumble of engines starting. Not a threat, not a warning, just the sound of work continuing. Dave swung a leg over his bike, the leather settling familiar and worn beneath him. Joel pulled up alongside, eyebrows raised in question. "She okay?" Joel asked. "Better than okay," Dave replied, watching Mary board the train through the tinted shield of his aviators. "She's paying it forward," Joel grinned. "Then we did it right." "We did it right," Dave confirmed. The crew fell into formation, engines synchronized, and they rolled out of the station lot in a wave of chrome and purpose. The thunder that had once arrived like a storm now departed like a promise kept, that mercy could be anonymous, that help didn't require ownership, that the strongest walls were the ones built by people who'd learned to hold each other up. Mary rode home with sunlight streaming through the train windows. Her son would be waiting, full of stories about his day. The fridge now held food that would last through the week. The power company's notice had been paid and filed away. But more than that, more than bills and groceries and lights that stayed on, she carried the knowledge that she wasn't invisible, that someone had seen her struggling and decided the weight didn't need to be carried alone. And now, having been held up, she would hold up other. The index card was still tucked in her wallet, creased from being read and reread. "Keep going. You're stronger than you know." She was. And she would. Outside, somewhere across the city, Dave and his crew returned to their modest garage, to the wall of Polaroids that would soon include a new photo, Platform C, cameras installed, a community made safer by people who didn't need their names remembered, only their work. The thunder faded into the distance, not as menace but as benediction, a reminder that protection could arrive on wheels and wear leather, and that the most powerful help was the kind that asked for nothing in return. Mary stepped off the train at her stop, squared her shoulders, and headed home to her son. The world was still hard. Bills would still come. Struggles would still find her. But she was no longer carrying them alone. And that, she thought as she climbed the stairs to her apartment, made all the difference.